Good evening. I'm John Lichter, Director of the Environmental Studies Program at Bowdoin College. The Environmental Studies Program and the McKean Center for the Common Good are pleased to welcome the Maine Fish, Farm, and Food Innovation Challenge. This is the first of two events. Tonight, longtime advocate for local foods, Michael Rozyne, will kick off the Innovation Challenge by describing the current state and potential of the local and sustainable food movement. The goal of the challenge is to elicit innovative ideas addressing the aggregation, distribution, and processing and marketing of locally raised and harvested food and fish. Winners of the challenge, to be held here on November 20th through the 22nd, will receive cash awards and services to help turn their ideas into action. More information about the competition is available in the handouts you received outside on the table, and then also at the Maine Innovation Challenge website. This Innovation Challenge is itself innovative and forward-looking. Tom Settlemyer of Bowdoin College and Bill Soretta of the Sustainability Lab are largely responsible for setting these events in motion. Tom and Bill will be available to answer questions about the challenge after tonight's event. We thank the numerous sponsors, partners in the planning committee for their work and contributions in making this event happen. Now I will turn the podium over to Professor David Vail to introduce tonight's speaker. David is the Adams Catlin Professor of Economics and Director of Environmental Studies, Emeritus. As Director of Environmental Studies, David catalyzed the interdisciplinary teaching and community-based research that has guided much of the program's work over the last 15 years. Throughout his career, David invested much of his scholarly work to improve Maine's rural economy through tourism and increasing investment in small business opportunities. He currently collaborates with the Maine Woods Consortium and the Appalachian Mountain Club to revitalize the North Woods economy, and with wireless partners to bring 4G wireless into rural Maine. Please welcome Professor David Vail.
Thank you, John. The Food Innovation Challenge really adds an exciting new dimension to all the activity that's going on around the state, and I would argue here in the Mid-Coast as well, where within the next couple of weeks we'll have the launch meeting of something called the Merry Meeting Food Council, and I hope some of you will be involved in that process. It's certainly appropriate that the organizers of the Innovation Challenge wanted Michael Rozyne to come and talk tonight, because Michael, as you'll hear, is a food innovator par excellence. So he will be helping us to launch this initiative with a talk that has the rather lengthy title. It'll take about half an hour to read the title. Healthy, green, fair, affordable. Can we have it all and scale it up? I hope the answer is yes, we can. It's a great personal pleasure for me to introduce Michael and to welcome him and his wife Kimberly back to Bowdoin and back to Brunswick, where Michael got most of his formal education and a whole lot of on-the-job training. And I think back to the 1970s when, as an 18-year-old, Michael arrived on campus, and I have a hunch that his mom and dad back in the Chicago suburbs would never have guessed that he'd spend most of his adult life with dirt under his fingernails. But here he is. So Michael gave me a bio to read, and I'm going to read it, but I probably won't stop there. So here's what Michael had to say about himself, in all modesty. Michael Rozyne is founder of Red Tomato, a nonprofit produce food hub based in Plainville, Massachusetts. He's been marketing small farm products for 3 decades, including work on conventional and organic farms in Maine, and as a buyer and marketing manager for a natural food distributor, Northeast Cooperatives. Back in 1986, he co-founded the fair trade coffee company Equal Exchange, now one of the largest 100% fair trade enterprises in the US, And I'm flattered to say that I think our dining room table was where a lot of the organizing of that took place. Michael started Red Tomato in 1996 to bring fair trade principles to fruit and vegetable farmers in the Northeast. His current obsession is finding a way to make local produce available in a grocery store near you. Well, I think that's a nice introduction, but I don't want to let it go at that, because for those of you who weren't at Bowdoin or weren't in Maine in the heady activist days of the late 1970s, in fact, I can see quite a few of you who weren't born in the late 1970s, I'd like to talk about a few of the things that Michael did as a student or shortly after leaving Bowdoin that highlight a couple of things. One, I think they show the kind of continuity over a period of 3 or more decades between the activism that is so vibrant today and the kinds of things that Michael and others, Bill Soretta, for example, from the Food Innovation Challenge, were trying to do back then. The other is to give you a feel, and I hope students especially will take this to heart, a feel for what you might call Michael's origins as a fearless innovator, a risk taker, as a happy warrior in the Zen sense of that, and first, last, and always a community builder. So if I could just mention a few things that Michael did that I can remember, part of what would be a very long list. On campus, he and some other students started an alternative newspaper called To the Root, which was focused on community building, feminism, and other important issues of the day that were not being articulated in the mainstream Bowdoin College media. In town-gown relationships, Michael really led the charge in organizing some faculty and students on the campus and bringing them together with artists, artisans, performers, and others in town to create something that was called Sunday, a really fun day of entertainment and activity all over the town of Brunswick. Also looking at the local community, Michael was one of the founders and leaders in the Brunswick Food Co-op, and for students who are here, I should mention this was before Bowdoin was being ranked the #1 dining service in the country, and in fact, lots of students lived off campus then. We didn't have dorm space for a lot of the students. So Michael was not a deserter from the college in being involved in the food co-op. After graduation, Michael worked for a couple of years for Estabrook Farms and was deeply involved in the fledgling period of the Brunswick Farmers Market, the one that's down on the mall on Tuesdays and Fridays to this very day. And if we widen the lens a little bit, Michael was also active in a group called the Maine Consortium for Food Self-Reliance, which was a prototype, I think, for some of the more political activist things that are going on around the food system these days. And I can't hand over the microphone to Michael without mentioning what for me was one of the most fun experiences as an economist at Bowdoin, and that was traveling the state from York County in the south to Aroostook County in the north with Michael, interviewing, sitting down, having coffee and meals with organic farmers, really doing the first systematic study that was ever done, I think, of organic farmers in a whole state in the United States. This was all part of Michael's on-the-job training that I mentioned before. Well, if I say any more, it might go to Michael's head, so I think I will, at this point, just turn over the mic to Michael.
Escape? That was escape? I got it. I see slideshow.
Or just actually read the whole screen while you turn the screen back over.
Here comes help.
I'll take care of it.
To the rescue. Thank you.
You're welcome. So you should just have to hit play when the time comes.
Okay. David, thank you for that lovely introduction and for doing the first 3 minutes of my talk. So this is a homecoming in two ways. It really has been fun. It's fun being back here and walking around a place I don't get to that often. I also, in preparing, reread a book that I haven't read since about 1980, The Unsettling of America by Wendell Berry, which kind of launched my career. The last responsibility I had here was given the graduation speech in May 1979. I was one of 4 people. We did a dramatic rendering of a senior graduating who had a tough choice between 2 jobs. One was working for a national bank, and the other was a community organizing job. And it was the stress and all the family pressure that we acted out on stage. This talk will happen in 3 sections: where I've been, where we are now in sustainable food, and where we're going, the challenge we face together. So, when I left Bowdoin College, I indeed worked for 2 years at Estabrook Farm in Yarmouth, worked for a very smart farmer named Mel Estabrook, and worked for $3 an hour, minimum wage, no overtime pay, and I loved it. After 2 years, I joined a migration of my college friends. We went to Boston, and I became a grocery buyer for the Northeast Food Cooperative warehouse, a natural food warehouse that served about 500 food co-ops in the greater region. And that is indeed where I learned how to wholesale food. The slogan then, "Food for people, not for profit," kind of rang loud and clear. And when I left Northeast Co-ops, I was finally able to articulate to myself the question that's guided my career ever since, which is, can a food business succeed and cause no harm? But I didn't use those words back then. The words I used were probably something like this: can a food business succeed and be fully fair trade and organic? 3 of us left Northeast Co-ops together to start Equal Exchange. And it actually wasn't your dining room table. It was Hubbard Hall right over there, where we had a strategic planning retreat hosted by David Vail, the person who I say really influenced my early thinking more than anyone else on food and ag. And sitting around that table, we asked ourselves, can we bend the rules of capitalism? Can we bend the rules of business in forming this new company? We got a lot of our initial support in setting up Equal Exchange from the Dutch, because there wasn't anything in North America really to guide us or to model ourselves after. But Europe had a fair trade movement. And so we launched Equal Exchange in 1986, bringing in Café Nica Nicaraguan coffee. But there was one small problem. President Reagan was in charge and was also at war with Nicaragua, and there was a legal embargo against doing any trade with that country. But having friends in Holland, we were able to export our beans to the Netherlands, roast them, package them, and bring in Café Nica, product of Holland, and legally enter the country across the embargo. Because there was a hole in the legislation that said if you transformed a product in a third country, then it could be brought in. So in those days, fair trade was defined by 4 standards. Fair price, which was formulaic. We never paid less than $1.26 a pound. That price had been agreed upon by the Europeans and the export cooperatives in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. The second part was trading with democratically run co-ops, providing them credit, and full transparency. For us, organics was very important, and we soon found our way to cooperatives in Colombia, Peru, and Mexico, where organic coffee was being produced. But it's the structure that I want to talk about tonight. That's where we actually bent the rules of capitalism and did a little bit of rearranging things in a way that I think offers lessons even till this day for the likes of the Innovation Challenge. We were 3 young men, single, in our 20s, with very little money, and we needed to raise $100,000 to start Equal Exchange. We also coming out of the food co-op movement were very strong on worker cooperativism and a little bit, I say, disoriented with the consumer ownership part of it, because consumers to us felt like they were too far from the action, too little aware of what it takes to run a successful food business. So we wanted to set up Equal Exchange as a worker co-op, but we had no money. So what we built was a structure whereby Class A stock was issued to workers only, and that came with the vote. And we issued outside stock and stripped it of its voting power. And if you look in the handout where you are, I think it's on the second page, you can see that 30 years later, Equal Exchange today is living by the same structure. But today, there are 300 to 400 outside investors who have contributed over, that information is 2 to 3 years old, over $12 million in working capital. And they receive a 5% dividend every year. And if you go to the first page, there's kind of a cute little graph there which Equal Exchange sent out to its investors that says, hey, if you'd taken $10,000 10 years ago, this was right after the stock market crash, and if you'd put it in the market, look at the graph, it shows you what would have happened. It would have gone way up and then it would have gone way down. But if you'd put it in the Energizer Bunny and accepted our 5% dividend a year, we would have just kept climbing up one step at a time and we'd be in the very same place. That was a big surprise to us, actually. I think a lot of our initial investors felt like they were giving money away philanthropically. But within 4 to 5 years, it became clear. And I think this structure offers a lot to people starting up in the sustainable food sector today. Equal Exchange, by the numbers today, product line is coffee, tea, chocolate, and a bunch of other things, including fair trade bananas. Sales are over $60 million a year. There are 115 worker owners of Equal Exchange, and as I said, working capital over 12 million, with people who have no voting control in the company. I stepped away from Equal Exchange in '96, took a sabbatical to design what's become Red Tomato. I wanted to translate the fair trade principles and ideas from Equal Exchange to local fruits and vegetables and start working with growers right here in this territory. I chose a nonprofit structure this time, realizing that the produce industry was going to be way tougher than specialty grocery had been with roasted coffee. Red Tomato has kind of a unique model. It's really a hybrid business nonprofit. If you walked into our office in the middle of the day, you'd think you were in the middle of a produce company. And yet, a very large portion of the work we do is educational work, and our income splits about 50-50. 50 raised from the business, 50% raised from philanthropy. The translation that got really tricky, translating the fair trade model to the local produce industry, was hard around fair pricing. Formulaic pricing just does not work in a produce company that's moving over 200 different items, the price of which is changing all the time. And so we developed something that we now call dignity pricing, which is actually a conversation with the grower about what's a fair price, rather than a formula. Translating green was also tricky. We began working with vegetables that were grown organically from the region. But when we got to fruit, we kind of had to throw our hands up, and you'll see right here what was the result of that effort. Growing organic fruit in this half of the country is extremely difficult because of the pest pressure due to humidity and climate. And so we developed an ecologically grown certification for tree fruits that we call Eco Apple and Eco Peach. And in a conversation this week, actually, with one of your state's largest apple growers, Harry Ricker, who's not a member of Eco Apple, but a like-minded kind of partner in crime, I would say. And he was saying that he thinks the ecological way to raise fruit in New England is through an advanced IPM program. He thinks that's the best way to protect the beneficials on his orchard. And that is really the philosophy behind what we do at Red Tomato right now. If you look at the map in the very back of your packet there, there's a map of Massachusetts and surrounding states. It gives you a picture of what Red Tomato does. We're a food hub, we're a distributor of produce, and we have no hard assets, no bricks and mortar. Like so many food hubs, we started with bricks and mortar, and we reached a point where the economies of scale that we had invited to be part of our enterprise just weren't showing up. And so we gave them all up, and we took a huge leap of faith and tried to operate the same customer base, the same grower base, and the same large number of products by utilizing the infrastructure of growers and hired partners. And lo and behold, within a couple of years, we had felt like this actually works. And so the tremendous relief for us was not having to be in the capital chasing game constantly, and to do the thing that we did best, which was to work with local growers, build supply chains, build relationships, and do the marketing. And so we exist today in coordinating a network of 45 growers in 9 states. We have 9 employees. We sell to more than 200 retail establishments, to some institutions, more and more, and our sales are just around $5 million. Here's a video that will show you how we operate. And it happens, we're lucky to have the Director of Marketing, Sue Futrell, who produced this video, sitting right there in row 2.
Ah, there she is. What a beaut. The local tomato. She's right here, on your grocer's shelf. Ooh, so juicy, so fresh. No, wait, ugh. Why is it so difficult to find local produce in your grocery store? Well, good question. Conventionally, big agriculture focuses on mass production on huge farms far, far away. They pick early, stuff big containers so that bigwigs in big buildings can organize big shipments, because that's how they make big money. It's shipped, ripened on the way, delivered to this warehouse, inspected by this guy, ordered by this grocer, all so that it can land on this shelf, and there you have it. A large-scale system organized to the T so that you can get any produce you want, anytime, anywhere. Compare that to local farmers. There are no bigwigs in big buildings to organize logistics, no massive system to manage huge shipments or minimize costs, just hardworking people dedicated to the quality of their produce. And they grow a lot, but alone, they can't fit the efficiency and supply that the system demands. So, odd as it is, logistics are the reason why these are rarely here. But folks, times are changing. See, there are a few visionaries who've thought, hey, why shouldn't local farmers have the logistical support they need to fit into this big system? So organizations like Red Tomato are making this happen. Day in, day out, Red Tomato's on the phone, on the road, on the farms, working with warehouses, coordinating pickups and deliveries, and basically doing all that stuff those bigwigs in the big buildings do for the big guys, only now for the local farmer. And they have hardly any time to get this done because they're working with perfectly ripe produce that needs to get on the shelf ASAP. But Red Tomato is getting it done. And not just for one farmer, but for lots of them. Because by bringing together all the resources, Red Tomato is actually able to provide the consistency and volume that grocers need to serve their customers well. So, the next time you're in the grocery store, that beautiful, locally grown tomato is right where you want it to be, along with the local carrots, strawberries, cucumbers, potatoes, pumpkins, apples, corn, water.
All right. How do I get rid of that? Okay. Oh, no. Okay. We can leave a tomato up there. That's cool. Okay. One tomato we can handle. So where are we? Where are we in the sustainable food system today? This is a huge topic. It doesn't really fit inside of this auditorium. There are courses on this that last more than one semester. So let me just give it to you from 30,000 feet above sea level. It's a mixed bag. I mean, think there was no environmental movement 50 years ago. There was no organic farming sector. We've come an enormous distance in a pretty short period of time. And if you look at the hunger and obesity statistics, you are humbled to the core. The other thing about this question is that The answer varies tremendously depending on where you're standing and what shoes you're wearing. If you're a restaurant worker in New York City, you're going to be celebrating the wage and tip discussion going on and ignoring a lot of things in agriculture. But if you're an organic vegetable farmer in southern Maine, you're going to be paying attention to the food farm direct marketing, access to market parts of the answer. If you're a 35-year-old middle-class shopper living near a city in the northeastern United States, you're very disconnected from food and agriculture and fishing. And this is the part where I want to start this assessment. The level of food and agricultural illiteracy in this country is so high. It's something everybody in this game has to pay great attention to. But because I'm standing here wearing these shoes at this event, I'm going to tilt the answer totally toward Maine and the Food Innovation Challenge. There are big things happening. They're in the headlines that affect all of us, everywhere, beyond Maine. Climate change will have a lot to say about where food's going to be grown and where it's going to be eaten. The widening wealth gap speaks tons about people's ability to afford food. Immigration laws, or the lack of them, will affect agriculture and whether or not we can actually harvest specialty crops in this country. Who would have thought about the widespread popularity of local foods? I know 10 years ago, that was not something we thought was going to take off to this degree. Food safety requirements have become, for many, an unfortunate issue that requires tremendous attention if you're wholesaling. Internet food sales is disrupting more and more of the food economy. I'm going to use the four markers of sustainability, part of that long title that I presented: healthy, fair, green, and affordable, as a view into where the sustainable food system is right now. Healthy food. Nationally, there are over 300 colleges taking action on local food to increase local consumption, 150 campaigning actively with the Real Food Challenge. The University of Maine in Orono, already achieving 18% in local purchasing, has just put out an RFP, committing itself to source 20% of the entire state's system by the year 2020, which will be $1.5 million. Green food. Good news here in Maine and in New England, the number of farms is up 12%. True for New England too, even though the country is down 1%. And farmland, this is between 2002 and 2012. Land and farms up 6% in Maine, same for New England, while the country is down 2%. I think you all know about organic food sales growth, now over $30 billion. What's important about that is that it's spreading to all food sectors, and it's actually reaching all kinds of people shopping in all kinds of stores. In the fair food category, fair trade globally now involves 1,210, over 1,000 producer cooperatives. 1.5 million peasant farmers and small farmers are involved, and the sale to the co-ops is over $1 billion, measured in €1 billion euros, rather. On the domestic side, here in the US, there are 2 new domestic fair trade certifications that have emerged in the last 5 years. One is the Agricultural Justice Project. The other is the Equitable Food Initiative associated with Oxfam America. In the cornerstone called Affordable Food, 2003, there were 10% of the households in the US were food insecure. And this is where the news gets humbling and sobering. Today, that's 14%. But today in Maine, it's 16.2%. On the other side, SNAP benefits, the new name for food stamps, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Maine has the highest percentage nationwide of SNAP benefits redeemed at farmers markets, and you're twice the rate of the state that follows behind you, which is Michigan. I'm going to add a 5th cornerstone of sustainability that didn't show up in the title, called local. I think we all know these numbers. There's more than 8,000 farmers markets today. That's a 76% increase since 2008. When I was in college, there weren't any CSAs. Today, there's 6,200 in the United States. There are more than 300 regional food hubs that have emerged in just the last 5 or 6 years. Think Farm Fresh Connection up here, or Northern Girl up in Van Buren. As of 2010, there were 110 food policy councils in the U.S. Today, there are 215, and I know some of them at a local level are functioning well in the state of Maine. Probably are some of you out there who are thinking, so is the answer to this question all random? Isn't there some scientific, objective way to answer the question, where are we in the food system today? So let me give you 2 stories. One is a project called Charting Growth, Developing Indicators and Measures of Good Food. This was a project started by the Kellogg Foundation working with the Wallace Center at Winrock International in 2005. Kellogg set a goal. We want to increase the good food in this country, and they use good food the same way that I'm using sustainable food. We want to increase sustainable food in the U.S. from 2% of the food supply to 10%. And so they hired a team of social scientists, and I was actually invited to be kind of the business person on this team, to develop definitions for healthy, green, fair, and affordable. That's where those indicators came from for me. And then we had to develop national indicators, statements of conditions that show the impact, that show how the U.S. food supply is or isn't healthy, green, fair, and affordable. To do that, we needed measures for each and every indicator, and then we were to use these indicators to assess the current supply of food. There was nothing about this project that was the least bit easy. And in the end, the team of social scientists that I was a part of, we surrendered on the last part of the charge, bridging our way back to actual products and an assessment of the U.S. food supply we felt was impossible. It was simply not going to be a meaningful exercise. There's a 68-page report called Charting Growth. For those, I gave you a taste of it in your handout there, but if you're a real data geek or you really thrive on this kind of evidence, it's a really worthwhile report that you can find on the Wallace Center website. It's a 68-page report. Another example I want to talk about is in the private sector, and that's what's happening at Whole Foods right now in their produce section. If you've been to the Whole Foods in Portland lately, I'd say in the last year, you're noticing that they're presenting their produce under the responsibly grown rating system, in which all vendors who participate are rated as good, better, or best. Some of them are also unrated because they couldn't participate. What's interesting about this is that Whole Foods, who built its supply chain around its relationships with organic, is making a bold move to step out and say, hey, we want to tell our shoppers about the whole produce section, not only the organic produce section. And so they have created a very deep database that measures farming practices on these criteria: soil health, energy use, waste reduction, farm worker welfare, water conservation, biodiversity, and pest management. And then they do the hard work of taking an incredible amount of information and filtering it through to good, better, or best. It's a very bold undertaking. Their goal is to differentiate themselves and their brand and their produce section from the increasing competition that's surrounding them, many of whom are trying to copy them. But they've run into some bumps, and this is where it gets kind of interesting. For one, and this was unanticipated, filtering the information from, I think they've done a good job of collecting data, but filtering that to their own staff in the produce departments has become really hard. It's very difficult, if you're in that produce department, to keep track of which product is coming, the the oranges were coming from this organic grower last week, but now it's someone else, and they're rated differently, and I have to change the sign, and it's overwhelming their own staff. Secondarily, and this was an anticipated reaction, was the pushback from the organic community. And I have to say, I think it's from a slice of the organic community that has made a public attack on Whole Foods and is really challenging the notion that products that aren't organic can be rated at point of sale equally, or in a few cases actually higher than organic product. And that raises some, I'd say, some deep questions for all of us to think about in relationship to what we're calling things and what we're calling good food and good farming practices. What I take away from this, and not just these two examples, I would say what I take away from the 30 years I've been trying to do this is that we are not going to measure and certify our way to sustainable food. And what's happening now is really showing, one, how difficult this is. You know, it's common in the food industry that burden gets shoved back on the producers. It always gets shoved back on those who are kind of the first in the chain, but the farthest from the money and the consumer. And the burden of many of these programs, including food safety, gets pushed back on the growers who have to do the administration and pay for the certifications and the inspections. And growers are becoming overwhelmed, especially the mid-size and the smaller growers. There's also, I think, an overload of information where people with brilliant systems and ideas are realizing that the filtering process between an enormously complicated database that's full of good stuff is very hard to translate into plain English so that people like us who shop can understand what's going on. Certifications will be part of this, no question, but I don't think we can get there by certifying ourselves there. So has anyone noticed I've been talking to this question about where we are for like 12 minutes, and I haven't said boo about logistics and distribution, which is what I do all day? Here's an hourglass. Picture this hourglass. The cup on top is 1 million producers and fishers. The inverted cup on the bottom, tens of millions of eaters. But every morsel of food that moves from here down to the eaters has to pass through the narrow neck in the middle. Now, some of you may be thinking, there is a clever bypass. It's called direct marketing. And in this state especially, that's a really important bypass. But it still only accounts for 3, 4, maybe 5% at best of the food in a place like this, and 1% in the country. In the neck of the hourglass is where there lies a huge disproportionate share of the power in the food system. It's where the processors and the transporters and the distributors and the wholesalers and the retailers live and do business. Without an understanding of logistics and distribution, no one is ready to build and design a new enterprise for the sustainable food system based on the values of healthy, grown, fair, affordable, and local. But the food system of today wasn't designed to be healthy or green or fair or local. It was designed to deliver durable products that could be transported thousands of miles in complicated supply chains that last year-round at minimal cost. And by their own standards, the conventional distribution system does a beautiful job of reaching these goals. And we all benefit from it. We all have a terrific array of products that we don't think a whole lot about, available all year, for which we spend a relatively small portion of our income. So while it's the hidden costs of the industrial system and the not so hidden costs and the overall social critique that brings us together tonight, take a minute to appreciate how the just-in-time logistics, the innovations in technology, the transportation infrastructure, the super complicated supply chains, and the manual drudgery and physical work it takes to move food through the system, how all these things together make it possible for a restaurant chef at the end of a grueling day at 5 p.m. to sit down in front of a computer and look at a list of 1,000 fresh products and place an order that will arrive in good condition 95% of the time tomorrow morning between 6 and 10 a.m. Now that sounds kind of boring if you're just like reading it in a newspaper. But what it takes for that to happen is astounding. And it's the best picture that I can paint of the fundamentals in action. Okay. Sip of water. Give me a minute. So that's where we are. So where are we going? Where are we going, or the challenge we face together? We have an advisor at Red Tomato. We're very lucky. His name's Jose Alvarez. Was CEO of Stop and Shop, now professor of retailing at Harvard Business School. And Jose says about visions, he says, all you really need to know, you need a clear picture of your destination, and you need to know your next step. Food Solutions New England, a network of many food organizations focused on the current problems and where we're going, has spent a lot of energy putting together an elaborate vision. There are some copies out there. You can find this online. It's called 50 by 60, which is short for 50% by the year 2060, and which they call for a future in which New England produces at least half its food and no one goes hungry. Two of the key assumptions are New Englanders are eating more diverse and healthier diets, and there's 3 times as much land producing food. 4 of the 9 authors of this document have close connections to Maine. Molly Anderson was formerly a professor at College of the Atlantic, just moved to Middlebury. Amanda Beal of Maine Farmland Trust. Mark Lapping, University of Southern Maine, and Russell Libby, missed terribly by many of us in the audience tonight. Former executive director of MOFGA and a classmate of mine here. He was a couple of years ahead of me. There's no way to read this and make sense of that kind of an ambitious vision without thinking about Maine and the farmland and the people and the energy and the excitement going on in this state. There's also a vision statement embedded in the one-page description of the Innovation Challenge. And it says, Maine has the opportunity to become the food production engine for New England. I wholeheartedly agree. This is a grand vision. This is such a grand vision, I'm going to read it again. Maine has the opportunity to become the food production engine for New England. This is such a grand vision that I think we will not get there without 3 things. The right mindset, the right basic operations, and collaboration. Right mindset. The right mindset's an open mind, a listening mind, able to see and act from the whole. So why is it so important that we see and act from the whole, and what does that mean? Because if we don't act from the whole, if you don't see yourself as part of something bigger than your own operation, then it's easy to believe that the competition for shelf space in the grocery downtown is the other farmer in town who got there ahead of you, and to miss seeing that your competition is the global produce commodity system that leaves so little room, so little space for anyone else to enter into that corner grocery store. If you don't see your work as part of something bigger, then it's easy for us to think we can do this on our own. Maine food for Maine people, especially here in Maine, because we've got the land, we've got the ocean, and we've got this indomitable spirit. when in fact, because of limited markets and a northern climate, Maine's going to get farther playing a smart role as part of a regional strategy. If we don't see our work as part of something bigger, then it's easy to believe that scaling up just means taking our successes and multiplying by 10 or 25. Instead of recognizing strategic limits in different places and figuring out how your piece fits together strategically with others to form a bigger, more realistic and attainable puzzle. If we don't see ourselves as part of something bigger, it's tempting to think, wow, after all those 10 years of hard work, I've really got this thing figured out. I know the path to a sustainable food system. And yes, there can be and there is fundamentalist thinking even inside efforts like the sustainable food movement. And fundamentalist thinking is inevitably divisive and a limiting force. That's the kind of thinking that made me switch my own language for my career path and move it to, can a food business succeed and cause no harm, instead of, can a food business succeed as fair trade and organic? It was more expansive and it shifted my personal allegiance. So what are right operations? I asked Jim Dwyer that question. He's a co-op extension agent up in Aroostook County. And I said, what's the biggest obstacle to this food engine vision? And he said, the biggest obstacle is marketing. Finding products to supply a market that's expanding so we don't have to push other people out. So when Jim Dwyer says marketing's the biggest obstacle, I think he means distance from markets, inadequate transportation, the product mix, and overall price competitiveness. But I've got to add a couple to that list of biggest obstacles, and that is farm labor, physical infrastructure, the cost of farmland, training, and investment capital. The right operations is getting the right balance between the fundamentals and the cornerstones of sustainability. Sometimes I worry that we tilt too much toward the cornerstones away from the fundamentals. I've got one caution here before we leave the area of operations. Today, the word innovation seems to be automatically equated with high-tech, biotech, and internet-based technology. Please dispense of the notion that technology will deliver unto us the right operations. This is a potato. This potato is 80% water. A case weighs 50 pounds. In today's depressed wholesale market, growers who are also packing their own are getting 15 to 20 cents a pound for this, or 8 to 10 bucks for a box. Vegetables are heavy, perishable, and most of the time, dirt cheap. Technology will no doubt make an important contribution to whatever happens here. Robotics in agriculture, robotics in warehouses, maybe even driving the delivery trucks and making up for the national shortage of truck drivers we've got. But I urge you in this process not to be seduced into thinking that clever apps and websites can override fundamental obstacles to distribution and marketing of Maine potatoes and fish and all the rest. On to collaboration. I spoke with Mark Winnie a couple days ago in preparing for tonight. Mark is founder of the Hartford Food System. He's one of the leading practitioners on community food security and has been for the last 35 years. And he went to college in Bates. He said, the hardest thing for me right now is that we're not working well together. And we're not working together enough. Collective impact is more than just a cool idea. It's the size of the obstacles we face. It's the resilience of the industrial food system, and it's Mark's thinking that I agree with that leads me to put collaboration high on this list. We're a decentralized movement comprised of medium, small, and tiny enterprises and organizations. And being decentralized is a strength in so many ways. But we need to come together to accomplish things like policy gains, public education, and to overcome the big obstacles. Coming together and working together effectively is part of our answer to scaling up. We tend to not think of something as soft as collaboration as a field for innovation. Collaboration is so difficult to do well. It can be time-consuming, expensive, it's fraught with egos and personalities that get in the way. And sometimes we jump to formal collaboration and bring in the lawyers when there are simpler, thrifty, neighborly ways to collaborate that would work almost or as well. So imagine collaboration in transportation, helping small producers reach markets at reasonable freight rates. Imagine collaboration among producers in the state, but also between states that make a supply chain more competitive by increasing the total volume, by adding adequate backup supply, so that when one grower is out of something, there's another grower right there to fulfill the order. Longer seasons of supply delivering to a customer that starts before Maine's earliest harvest and continues when the Maine harvest is done. Imagine collaboration among states and land grants so that we can spread the benefits of public research and outreach. My state, Massachusetts, has a unique food safety program called Commonwealth Quality. The growers love it because it's state subsidized and it's simpler and it's well executed right now. But for how long is a state like Massachusetts going to be able to afford this program before it gets the axe? There's potential here for all of us to come together around food safety. Collaboration may be the only way we can develop sophisticated enough communications to reach the public with a new comprehensive food narrative, one that actually sticks. And the same is true for reaching policymakers. And collaboration is how we show social investors and philanthropic funders the power of collective impact. And that's the non-financial return that they actually want. For a decentralized movement like ours, with many thousands of grassroots participants, most without a lot of money and a small budget, collaboration is indeed a field for innovation. So, can we have it all? Healthy food for everyone, green farming, fishing and business practices, fair relationships throughout the supply chain, and a strong local economy? Well, if having it all means reaching all of these attributes for most products at the same time, as defined by the strongest advocates for each one, focused narrowly on their particular attribute, then the answer is no. Not in the foreseeable future. But if you look to your left and you look to your right, and you are in the company of others who share your commitment, who are willing and wanting to collaborate toward a broad, clear, grounded vision of a sustainable food economy for Maine and for the whole region, then the answer is yes. We can build a food system that causes increasingly less harm, guided by a moral compass pointing toward healthier, greener, fairer, local, and affordable food. We've already started down this path towards something that we'll be proud to pass on to future generations. Thank you. Yeah.
We have plenty of time for some questions.
Stan.
Could you talk about being a nonprofit now, Red Tomato? Could you talk about being a nonprofit now and whether at your current size you still need philanthropic dollars to subsidize your distribution system? That's one question. And my other question is, for Red Tomato, what do you think about scaling up? Do you want Red Tomato to be a $25 million organization, or do you see other Red Tomatoes being created?
Good questions. I'm going to ask Sue Futrell, our Director of Marketing, to join me up here, because we talk about these things all the time. So just restate the first one.
At your current size, do you still need to be a nonprofit? Do you need to subsidize your business side of your operations?
You want to take it?
Want me to answer that one? Hi, Michael told me about 5 minutes before tonight that he was going to get me up here, so I'll do the most justice I can to the questions. The philanthropic question is one that we get a lot because Red Tomato's been around for almost 20 years, and we're longer than a lot of the new food hubs that are getting grant money now and starting, and often get pressured to turn that immediately within 2 or 3 years into a self-sustaining operation that they won't ever need support again. We think that the work of developing new models and building new markets and systems to connect farmers with consumers is not work that the marketplace pays for willingly. It's very hard to make a go of it as a small-scale produce distributor or marketer or farmer, anybody in that piece of the industry. So we want that part of what we do to be competitive, to pay fair prices to the growers, to support our staff and the costs of distributing and collaborating and getting food to market. But we don't think we're ever going to be able to sell enough produce at high enough prices to pay for the work that we do to help share what we learned with other people, try new things, test out marketing, do the kind of market development and video and things that we want to do to see if we can help move the needle. That all takes philanthropic support. So we've kind of said going in, we're not trying to get to the point where we never need another dime. We need help from people who care and support the vision, and we will for the long term.
But that's not to say others couldn't do similar work and structure differently. I mean, I think the thing is that every organization falls into a unique identity, and we make the absolute most out of being both a nonprofit and a business. We find ourselves in a translation role constantly. We're translating to the food industry what's going on in functions like this. What does transparency mean? When this whole thing started, the food industry could not get its hands around why transparency mattered, for one thing, and two, why are you asking me about the price that I paid the grower for the zucchini that you just bought from me? What business is that of yours? The whole notion of transparency was mind-boggling, and now it's seeping in. But being both puts us in a translator role, and that's actually one of our functions. Well, did we answer your second question? Scale.
You answer that one.
We're trying to grow. I think we'd like to be a $5 to $10 million operation in sales, but it's not really important to us that we continue to grow forever. In fact, I think the things that we really look at here is, can we be to be the most effective Red Tomato? We're also looking at other roles that we can play, and sometimes that actually means assisting other food hubs, which we do regularly, sometimes on contract, sometimes not. But I think we feel like we need that extra scale to be as efficient as we want to be, but it doesn't mean we're aiming for 25 million as soon as we hit 10. Yeah. The last thing about that is, when we gave up our assets, it meant that we had the ability to grow without constantly adding more and more staff, and that was one of the best paybacks of that whole change.
I just wondered, I'm kind of maybe I've just started a Central Maine gleaning group, and I wondered if gleaning has anything to do with your model, and if you are at all connected with BAG, which is Boston Area Gleaners, which has been around for over 10 years.
We have colleagues who work in gleaning and have met them at conferences recently and had this very conversation. And the Daily Table opened up in Boston, which is trying to recycle food into a inner city neighborhood. And we have found that because we're in relationship with growers where we're trying to improve the income side of their operation, it puts us in a strange place. And there are all kinds of possibilities with the growers we work with, but we found the most effective thing is to just put them in direct contact with the gleaning organizations and to not be the intermediary on that. So I'd say, yeah, it's an important part of our overall network. It's just not a role we're taking.
What is gleaning?
What is gleaning?
When a farmer's done harvesting and it's no longer economically practical for him or her to go back into the field to harvest, he calls me or she calls me, and I have a splash email, and I organize a gleaning, and 3 or 4 people show up in this field, and we work 2 hours, and like this morning we harvested 300 pounds of carrots off the field for the food bank. We've done corn, potatoes, squash. Yesterday we had 1,200 pounds of squash off the field because it's just no longer feasible for them to pay someone to do that. It goes to food bank. It goes around all food bank.
I want to add one more thought to the question about gleaning, because food waste and finding ways to make that usable food used is a huge issue and something really important. I would say in our work, one of the most heartbreaking things that happens is the day that you're on the phone with a farmer who's got a crop in, who's already hit that gleaning point where it doesn't pay them to put somebody in the field to harvest it and cool it and truck it before they've even taken the crop out of the field. And that happens more often than you would like to think, and sometimes it gets plowed under if there's nobody there to come and take it to a food bank. So in some ways, our focus a lot of the time is to keep keep that gleaning point as far from the grower as we can by finding markets and helping them actually sell the product, and then hoping that when that happens, there's somebody like you there to.
Another piece to our model is the reciprocity piece. So, for example, yesterday we were in a field with squash. And the farmer had put down black plastic as a weed control, and he was paying a couple people to pull the plastic up. And had I thought of that ahead of time, I would have brought, 10 people arrive, we each do 3 rows, and it's done. He pays nothing.
Yeah.
So that there's always that key reciprocity piece of maybe walk a field with 20 volunteers to pick up rocks, get them out of the field, something like that. Something that needs to be done that won't cost him any money, so then him or her, so that at the end of the season, when they do give us 250 gleaned ears of fresh corn, then it works.
Collaboration.
Okay. Back there.
Hi there. Are you doing any work with some processing or pre-processing to sort of slice and dice and freeze to extend the growing season and extend the market, or are you strictly doing fresh fruits and vegetables?
Strictly fresh. We've been in conversations because we're doing institutional food now more and more. We're starting to talk to people who are doing the processing, so that may be part of our future.
Actually, we sold Massachusetts French fries and sweet potatoes to our institutional customers a couple weeks ago. And we did that because one of the farms that we work with has processing on farm, and they did it. So little by little.
I've read stories about tax incentive financing for motels, for circus schools, for convention centers. I haven't seen many or any for food marketing or processing. And I even read a story about the agriculture department giving $1 million or so for a motel in Lewiston, Maine. Can you talk a little bit about the role that government can play in this, in our sort of goals, and including agricultural schools. How do you change the tradition of these institutions?
Well, what strikes me is I'm looking out at the audience and I'm seeing so many policy experts out there that know 10 times more than 50 times more than I do. I'm wondering if we can find someone in the audience who can do a better job than we can on policy, which is not our work. Don't be shy out there. There are policy wonks amongst us. Somebody who, good.
I think, did you mean tax increment financing?
Yeah, if you're going to have a marketing program or processing, you know, isn't one of the first questions you ask is why isn't the government behind it?
Tax increment financing is where you add value to a piece of real estate and there's a property tax increase that is then dedicated to an economic development purpose. So you need to have some investment in a property to create that value in the property, and then taxes are then. So the other tax program is current use, open space, farming, tree growth, things like that. So from a tax perspective, if you can find from a food hub, if you could find a way of building a food hub building that added value to that, you could take that property tax increment, assuming they're paying property tax. If they're nonprofit, they may not be paying a property tax. So if they're assuming they're paying a property tax, then you can take that and the community can invest it into that operation or other similar operations, and there's a chain that can be created, but you have to add value to the real estate to do that. So.
Well, I mean, what I hear from colleagues who work in policy is that many state governments do not get the highest marks for leading and innovating on policies that support the development of sustainable food. I'm sure there are examples to the contrary. In my state, that food safety program, that's a government program, came out of the innovation of our Department of Agriculture, and it's actually made a pretty significant difference. And I know there are food policy councils, more and more, operating at the state level, some with some success and some kind of lagging slowly. So I wish I had more details for you, but I think we should probably open it up to questions where we at least know the territory better. Sorry. Okay, one hand in the middle, and put hands up higher, because it's sometimes hard. Okay, so one there and then one there.
Two glass half empty, half full observations I'd like to hear you comment on. I work with Apple IPM for Extension University, and I was on the
Glenn.
yeah, and I'm just on my way back from the annual meeting of all the extension research people, and there's still good capacity there, but the trend is not good. We're not getting younger, and those positions aren't being filled as people retire and age out. So the whole land grant sort of extension support is a big question. And and I'm on my way to the Northeast IPM Center meeting next week. If you have any input for what you want from the extension land grant and research system, I'd be interested in hearing that, maybe after the talk. And then another observation is, I've just finished reading Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything, and she makes the exact same observation about the energy delivery system of being commodified and separated from other values that you're making about the food system. And that's almost a glass half full observation, that these two things are in such synchrony. There's a parallel impetus there, and just wonder if that spurs any thoughts on your part.
Thank you. And Glenn Kaler is one of the extension research scientists that a lot of our growers depend on, people like you and other researchers. And when you asked the question about government support, that was actually what was going through my mind is the role of land grant and public research and how critical that is to growers when they're trying to figure out new crops, how to deal with pest issues, climate change, diseases, all these things that, it's only a tiny % of the population that's worrying about this stuff because there's so few farmers, but the public funding for it has kind of shrunk as that population has shrunk, and yet all of us depend on that for good, healthy food. So support for land-grant research, public science, and extension, to me, is one of the biggest public policy issues that affects the kind of food system we have. And the other one, maybe just to mention, is, without opening the can of worms that is our Farm Bill and food policy too far, Michael, in his talk, mentioned that fruits and vegetables in the USDA ag programs are called specialty crops. And I come from the Midwest, where the commodity crops, corn and soybeans, are the ones that have programs and price supports and have had insurance and all kinds of government programs, many of them good, for a long, long time. And only in the last few years have some of those conversations about the Farm Bill started to focus back on food crops and ways to support those and think of them as food crops, maybe instead of as specialty crops. So I think there's something there to what you're saying. But the land grant and public science and extension system, to me, is the unsung hero of why we have the good food that we do have, and it needs our support. So.
So I work for Highmore Farm, and I'm looking for jobs like yours. But we have a project going on right now where we're trying to pinpoint the harvest windows for broccoli up and down the eastern seaboard from Florida to Maine to be able to fill that market, niche and need regionally more so than like internationally. So I was just wondering what sort of work you guys are doing with increasing like season extension and making sure we have crops year round, and if you have like a distance that you try to keep your buying within.
That's a really good question for us. So when we started, we had a 3 to 4 week tomato season because we were using New England tomatoes, wholesale tomatoes. So we couldn't get them at the beginning because they were being sold for high prices to farm stand, blah, blah, blah. So now we have a 16 to 18 week tomato season because we are going down the path that you're saying. So still from the 9 states that we work, which would be New England plus New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, we have been able to start with a high tunnel operation in southern Pennsylvania and then move up and then move back down. And we're still selling. So here it is. When did you guys get your first serious frost? About last week? And in Massachusetts, it was 2 nights ago. And our high tunnels in Pennsylvania, we think, have 2 to 4 more weeks of tomatoes in them. So that's a good example. But there's a food hub section coming up at the NESOG, Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Working Group Conference, which is going to be in November 12th and 13th. That's going to cover this very topic about how do we hold on. If we've done the hard work and built good relationships in important accounts, and we have their attention, and they want a local program, then how do we make that work for the most number of farmers? And I think you're really pointing the way there, and I'd love to hear more about what you're doing with broccoli, because that feels like an important crop. There's a lot of broccoli sales, and that's one that we can really stretch out. I predict that food hubs will start to work with each other between regions and start to lengthen and stretch the concept, not necessarily of what local means, but of what good food is, of what sustainable food is. I don't think we need to trick people or even try to persuade people that local is now 600 miles coming to a store near you. We know it was 450 last week, but that's not what's happening here. What we're really talking about is a particular sector of farms that we want to protect, care about, a quality of food, and how do we stretch it out to make our organizations viable, which gets to the first question that got asked. When you think about making food hubs profitable, right? So what do we do December 1st through April? If you're promoting seasonal food and we're not going the direction that you're pointing in here, then all of a sudden we lose an awful lot of our potential products to market. At Red Tomato, we happen to be 55% apples. This is our most important product line. So we have controlled atmosphere product that we can sell through May, and that makes a big difference. But there's only so many turnips and stored beets that can actually pay the bills. Your hand's been up.
Hi, thanks. I've been really interested in coming back home to Maine. I've been gone for almost 20 years. Finally bought the property. Lots of trees on it. A little bit of field, a little bit of garden space. Interested in organic gardening, my husband and I both. Just wondering, any advice? We're not millionaires, so we're gonna need some grants. We're MOFGA members, I plan on speaking with them. But otherwise, you know, any great advice, any great training that, you know, you would have us get involved in for startups?
Well, I was going to say join MOFGA, but you've already done that. And you might call these guys at Extension up at Highmore Farms, and there's a huge resource in that extension system that might be a good place to start. And I bet other people in the room here know better answers to that question.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of question maybe to go further after this all breaks up. But the one thing I'll say is that I think when it comes to reducing risk for new growers or for new ventures, that build whatever it is you're going to build to some degree in a market-driven fashion, so that you understand your market and are choosing your products and the whole evolution of whatever you're going to build with the marketplace right next to you, possibly in partnership if you actually end up wholesaling. There's too much risk on growers, and that's one way to share it.
You had mentioned that it will take all sizes, and you used the word tiny. And many of the folks who are starting are very enthusiastic and terrified at the same time, and may or may not have the opportunity and the resources to scale. So could you define or give a vision of tiny that is viable and something that fits into the picture as you described, that doesn't require an enterprise to feel the pressure to scale? How does tiny fit in? What does tiny look like?
That's not an easy question. I'll bumble my way first, and then you'll be thinking up a better answer, and then we'll turn to you in a minute. I mean, I think there are really different versions of tiny. Part of it is like, where are you trying to get to? I think that's where for us, we spend a lot of time actually not bad-mouthing big and assuming that small is beautiful and big is bad. And I mean, we work with mid-sized growers at Red Tomato. And it's not about size, it's about what's up here. It's about the mentality that you have when you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror. We need to be working with wholesale growers who have a commitment to a certain kind of quality control. And they wake up in the morning and they say, I just want to pack out the best quality Honeycrisp I can and make you proud. And so when you get to scale, what came to mind when I was listening to you deliver this incredibly hard question was, if you're really tiny, then I think there has to be some kind of a cushion there in the beginning, whether it's another job. I mean, you kind of have to say to yourself, I'm going to take 3 years to figure out what this is. It took us 5 years at Red Tomato to actually build a business model. and to come to what works. So if you're tiny, then you're not going to have the income. You're not supporting yourself, so you need an answer to that, for starters. But I think the real thing is, like, where do you want to be down the road? And then, regardless of what your scale is, you're building a progression towards that and hopefully finding ways to cushion your progress there as you move toward it. Okay, now let's hear your version.
See, we think we're tiny at Red Tomato. And in fact, before I came to Red Tomato, I worked for a wholesale company in the natural and organic products distribution world that did $400 million a year, and we were small. So $4.5 million a year feels tiny. Having said that, I think in some ways, the longer I'm involved in food, good food, the less size per se seems like the critical question, because it is, I mean, it's all an equation ultimately. There's what it costs you to live and do what you're doing and what you can bring in for it, and you know what that margin is and the difference. So I've seen great, very tiny companies do well if they put those two things together in the right way. If it's a product that they're able to sell at a high enough margin with low enough costs that they can, you know, that you can bring in what you need, then that works. And you can be $400 million a year and trying to work on a margin, you know, after cost that's like under 1%, and it doesn't feel like enough. So I think in some ways, my answer might be a little bit the same as Michael's. I think there's a place for almost any kind of good, productive, well-run, high-quality food in the food system, and some of it comes from very, very large companies. And I'm a fan. I'm a fan of a bunch of products that come from very big, well-capitalized, well-run companies with a lot of integrity. And there's the stuff I buy at the farmer's market in Bath on Saturday morning, and you know, you will never take that caramel sauce away from me. And I pay $10 a jar for it because it's so incredible. I have no idea if the woman who makes it is making a living, but it seems like it might be possible to do with the right with the right mix of things. So that's the hardest question we've had all night.
Grocery chains. Do I need this? I'm interested in the grocery chains. Who's good? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Is Hannaford's receptive? I mean, where? Talk about it. Be candid about that.
Did you?
Actually,
I want to take your question seriously without, I mean, first of all, these are the people that, that we sell to, and so I think I can go down that road somewhat to say that the supermarket competition right now is unbearably intense. I mean, it just feels like every decade I wake up and say, I didn't think this could get much worse. And the guy I quoted, Jose Alvarez from Harvard Business School, professor of retailing, he just put out a book called Retail Revolution, and in there he does, actually, check out the book Retail Revolution. There's a lot of some very graphic graphs and data in there which kind of takes you down and shows what consumers are saying and choosing. But I would say that chains do have personalities, but we find we can't even generalize about chains. That if we, for example, we sell to Whole Foods, and there are 10, I think, regions in the country where there are Whole Foods warehouses, and they're not the same. They treat us differently. Whole Foods gives them tremendous autonomy, and the one in our region has I'd say, a very genuine respect for agriculture. And that's not true everywhere. That's because Whole Foods constructed its company by acquiring different smaller companies, and they have personalities and cultures, and they actually last despite the attempts to inculcate everybody. And so it's not a clean sweep there. But I would say in our territory, not breaking things into good and bad, Market Basket is doing some pretty extraordinary work and is keeping all of its competitors up at night. And that is not only about price. And they're just a company to watch. Not only the drama that happened last summer, if you read the Boston Globe, that was probably better than any Netflix serial you could imagine. I'm talking about the way they retail and the way that they customize stores to particular neighborhoods, and that's really educational for me to go into those stores. We have built a relationship with Hannaford the last 2 years. And, you know, when I was farming in Maine, I'd take my little Datsun pickup truck with Estabrook Farm on the back, and I'd load in 75 boxes of tomatoes, and I'd park it in between like 50 tractor trailers. And this was like a big ego rush for both me and the truck to be parking in there. And Hannaford had a reputation as really caring about the community and growers back then. And I find, even though that Hannaford is now owned by Delhaize in Belgium, that hasn't happened yet, right? I find that culture still lives inside of Hannaford, and at the level at which we interact with them, we have a level of an actual kind of a conversation that just feels really human and kind of grounded and basic in a way that we don't with other chains. And I find that to be a real positive. And that's kind of through with all the people that we work with there. Sue, is there any other examples that you want to?
I might go even further and say I think it really does make a difference than, not always, again, size. The bigger the company, the more difficult I think it is internally to execute programs like local and labeling and the rating system at Whole Foods that Michael talked about. So there are always challenges with a larger organization because of that. But I would say, in fact, yeah, having sold groceries to the big and the small for 20 years, there's a huge difference in the feeling, the values, the kind of conversation we have when we go into Hannaford or into Whole Foods than there is when we go to, can I say Stop and Shop? Now, it could change. It could be a different person. It could be someone in an organization that's got a mission or has been given the directive to make something happen that hasn't happened there before, and that can change everything. But when we are able to find a partner, often the sort of mid-sized independent supermarket chains, of which there are fewer and fewer, are able to kind of meet that. They're big enough to have time to get something done, but they're small enough that it's not so complicated. Those can be really good partners, but not all of them are. I mean, it just really depends, I think, on the values that are sort of built into what that company defines as success. And usually you can see it when you're in the store because that's what's out front. So.
One more thing for retail geeks. The most provocative part of that book, Retail Revolution, that really struck me was, and I've read this in the trade press, was the point that the large chains in competing with each other for decades have used consolidation and cost reduction as one of their main tools of how to remain profitable. And what these three authors are saying is they are running out of space and tricks to continue doing that. In other words, through consolidation and through constant cost reductions, cutting here and there, there's not that much left to cut, forcing the chains to kind of look at ways to differentiate themselves through things like customer service and product line differentiation. And one of the things that's happening, and many chains are doing this, are new divisions, new companies inside of companies that are launching small format, fresh and prepared food features. So small stores that are focusing largely on fresh and prepared foods. And think about the chains you know. So Whole Foods is launching 365 next year, which will be a whole new division of Whole Foods based on that model. Ahold has just introduced, under a couple of different brands, the one in Boston is called Be Fresh. Same idea. We've got this thing going on in Walmart, and we're going to see this over and over again, partly because people are moving back. These kinds of formats can fit in cities, and they can fit in places where people are going to be living in 10 to 25 years, not where they're living now. Any other questions? We'll start with people who haven't spoke yet. I think right over here.
So one of the focuses for your work is to bring us better food, but I have a longer-term concern that the changes in fuel availability are going to impact our ability to bring in food from Peru and Argentina. Do you today feel the impact of the fluctuation of transport cost, seeing that it's dropped considerably over the last year? Does that impact the system?
You'd think we would. We're kind of renegotiating our truck rates year by year, and they went up steadily with the cost of fuel, and we're not getting a lot of that back right now. So I think you knew that was the answer coming before you asked it, but that's definitely how we're experiencing it right now. And some people are saying, well, the national truck driver shortage is shaking up everything. We can't find trucks. There's uncertainty, there's higher risk out there, and I think there's truth in that. We're feeling that too, but we're not seeing the reduction. Nope.
How about a last question? Anybody?
You want to ask? You had your hand up again.
Is there any, go back to the question about the tiny farmer, is there any system or any point of your system, a little altruism built in to maybe protect the small farmer? As an example, a friend of mine who's a small farmer saw last year that ginger prices were going to be pretty good, so he invested for him a fair amount in growing ginger. Well, so did a lot of the bigger places, so consequently he didn't get the market share that he thought he was going to get, so he ended up, I think he's in the black, but just kind of barely. Can you, I mean, as a small farmer, can you get a price a year ahead or anything like that to protect your investment? Is there anything like that that you do?
Well, the fair trade model that I talked about builds credit into every transaction. So peasant farmer cooperatives are extended credit. That's just part of the deal. That's a benefit that they get. I would say what I think, but this is not new. I mean, what we experience in our grower network is a level of informal cooperations where growers are doing things for each other, whether it's providing packaging that somebody ran out of, or, I mean, the thing that happens all the time, when we ship a truckload, it usually comes from 3 to 5 different growers. It has to be aggregated somewhere. And our growers do that for one another all the time, and it sometimes means unloading 5 trucks with your own staff, filling up your refrigerator with other people's products, holding it for a day, putting it on another. And all of that happens all the time, and it never gets billed or charged or anything. And I feel like, but that's an old story, right? Farmers have done this for one another for a long, long time. But, I mean, and is it altruism? You can call it that. Is it just kind of smart, long-term human way of being in the world? Maybe that's the same thing.
Well, I think we've set a record for a discussion after a talk at Bowdoin. Please, let's thank Michael and Sue for a wonderful discussion. Terrific.